All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 20 of the Kids from It podcast. You're joined by me, TJ Whitehead, Power Taken Not Given, as always, and with my dear friend Melanie, all the way from down under. How you doing, Melanie?
I'm good. How you going? Hi,
Fantastic.
yeah. You'll hear the down under come through every once in a while.
You know, I was going to mention that when we were backstage, that when I hear your voice now, I do hear like the hint of it. It's like someone sprinkled some Australian accent on there. You know, I imagine this is inevitable. It's living in the area. How long you been there?
8 years now, I think.
Yeah,
it comes through more sometimes than others. Specific slang or words will really bring it out. But yeah, I think Americans think that I sound Australian now, and Australians think I sound American. So the worst of both worlds.
It is. It really is. It's like an example of this is it's a terrible person, but it's the first one I think of when I think of this. Have you heard of Andrew Tate by any chance?
Unfortunately.
Okay, all right, the misfortune. But he's a weird fucking accent, right? Like when you hear him talk, you're like, where the hell is this guy from? And then I found out he was born, I think, in Indiana or something, or somewhere in the Midwest, but he left for Europe, for Britain, when he was like 4 or something. So his accent is all fucked up. So that's why he's so, you know, to the Aussies, you're never going to sound like one of them, I imagine. Wow. And to us, it's just like, what's she doing here? What's going on? What's she trying to pull over on?
Something on. Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine, and she went to Outback Steakhouse, which I'm sure you know, but folks, not an Australian restaurant. It was started in like Boston or something. I remember it was just like some Americans came up with this and thought it was a cool gimmick, and I was very disappointed to find out that it wasn't Australian. But anyway, she went to an Outback Steakhouse, and the waiter they had did this really like bad fake Australian accent. Like he came up and he started talking to them. They're like, wait a minute, is this real? Because it sounds awful. And they was like, okay. But then as the night went on and it got more stressful, the accent just kept getting worse and worse. And I was
it's
like, man,
a hard accent to intentionally put on. It is actually, it's very difficult. And Australian actors are quite good at putting on American accents. It's funny. A friend of mine who's an actor, because I work in film, just got a gig doing a commercial for Outback Steakhouse because he lives in LA now. Oh. And he's like, as soon as I had to try to pronounce it, I started phrasing. But it's a very hard accent to do. If you're American, you should try it sometime. It does not go well.
I remember you telling me one time that someone heard you say bananas in pajamas and it freaked them out. Oh, can you tell that story? I remember you telling that. It was so funny.
Well, it just, I think they had used to dub it, and these kids, so I said, yeah, bananas in pajamas. And they're like, what? I'm like, there's the kids show Bananas in Pajamas. And they're like, you mean bananas in pajamas? I just said, what? Yeah, and of course, there's a magpie. Like it's Australian. It makes sense. It was basically like the proto Bluey, but it had just never really occurred to me.
Yeah. That is funny. It's funny thinking of kids saying bananas in pajamas. It's just very funny to me. I think of little children saying that. Like that really throw me off.
And you can hear it though. As soon as you try to do the Aussie accent, it comes out as like a weird posh British.
Yeah, you know what?
That's how it does.
So does a Southern accent. Like a Southern accent, like if you speak
I
it,
lived down south for a while, so I can do the drawl.
Yeah, I began to notice that a Southern accent sounds suspiciously, or not suspiciously, but I mean, it sounds very similar to like a British one. I can see
like lazy. It's just like slow.
Yeah, it's like a slowed down British accent with like, I mean, I guess you could say that for all, American English accents as they descended from British accents, but I can see the correlation really strong in the Southern accent. And so the Australian one, I can hear that too. It's interesting. Another strange one is South African. That's the South African English accent is a bizarre one.
Kiwi, New Jersey, South African, like they're all in this little weird Venn diagram.
Yeah. The New Zealand one. For some reason, the New Zealand one and the South African one sound more similar to me.
Very similar.
Than the Australian, and which you would figure would.
It is 100% true.
Yeah. And one last thing, well, two last things about Australia is I remember being really annoyed. I watched ESPN when I was a kid, and it would always say Foster's Australian for beer, and I'd be like, all right, Australian is not a language. It's just weird. I guess, that's it's just an odd thing to say. And Vegemite. I remember a guy we went to school with, Mike Sturwald, we called him Stu. He went to Australia years ago, And I remember him saying, "Hey TJ, I had some Vegemite. It was awful." I remember him saying that it was terrible. So what's your I mean, have you tried it? I guess I should ask. It's
Okay,
been
so Vegemite tastes approximately like earwax. And I have to say, unfortunately, literally within the last 6 months, I have finally found a use for it, like a taste for it.
okay.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. It's very earthy. You have to use it very sparingly with a lot of butter and like cheese and avocado and things. And it's yeah, for a long time I thought it was disgusting, and now I've realized I've acclimatized, and it's really good. It's just like a little bit in a soup. Like if you're making like a potato and leek soup, it's got this incredible, like strong, yeasty, earthy, earwaxy type of tone to it. You know, don't let anyone tell you Australians don't have culture.
Okay. So essentially, as long as Vegemite's not the star of the show, you can kind of bear it. It
Yeah,
sounds like.
absolutely. Yeah.
That's good. All right, I can dig it. I can dig it. Well, all right. So on this show here, we try to dig deep into the past of the independent fundamentalist Baptist movement and everything, and just talk about our experiences. Because just like you said on the message you left me this morning, talking about it in Australia, and you've seen that in the States too, but I'm sure it's way worse somewhere else. Where you mentioned, oh yeah, I kind of grew up in this weird ass cult, and I had to go to these schools. And it's like, oh yeah, I went to a Catholic school. It's like, no, no, sorry, it's not the same. It's not quite the same at all. But Melanie and I attended school together, college together at currently Maranatha Baptist University and in Watertown, Wisconsin. And we've talked about this place before on the show, but before I want to get there eventually. But first, want to delve a little bit into your background. How you grew up, where you grew up, and how you first got involved in this movement.
Well, I grew up in San Francisco, Bay Area, and my like it's weird. You kind of have to talk about my parents, to figure out how I got involved, because my parents, I think, had my mom grew up Italian Catholic, fairly just culturally Catholic, like a lot of Italians, and then my dad grew up Baptist, but like sort of nominally Baptist. And if you look, and you try to almost like when I first left, you try to figure out basically your detective, and you're trying to piece together like how did they get involved in this, right? And you look at my dad, and I think as he was, coming of age through the Reagan years and that sort of thing, and then when George W. Bush, he started just becoming scared of a lot of things, losing power of the culture wars or whatever, and they joined. They'd gone to, like, from what I can tell, like a fairly normal church, and then they joined this church right after I was born. So I think the idea of like, oh, we have kids and we need to, sort of protect this family unit, because I was the firstborn. I have a younger brother, and they joined this church, and the church was already kind of fringe. And then in the next few years, and I can even figure it out, like looking back as I was, sort of going through, like from 5 to 10, like it radicalized real hard, real fast. And so I don't really remember anything prior to that. And I know through talking to like my mom's mom, my grandma was very against this, and my dad's mom was against it for different reasons. Fascinatingly, like theologically, she agreed with a lot of it, but
Mm-hmm.
she had massive issues with like the rules and the craziness and things like that.
Hmm.
So, you're trying to piece all of that together, because that's all I knew until I was sort of like 13. So I had a weird thing where I was 13 and my parents left and we moved down south, joined a church that was much more progressive, and then I went to university at Maranatha with you, and Maranatha kind of sits probably around the same type of space where I was a teenager. So to me, that felt liberal and progressive, like wildly liberal and progressive, because comparatively, it was, you know. So that was my sort of trip.
All right. So you mentioned that your mom grew up Catholic, and I was surprised to
Mm.
hear that. I don't see a lot of Catholic converts to the fundamentalist Baptist movement. And for good reasons, honestly. Like you said, like
Well,
you're.
you wanna hear a real trip? My
Yeah,
mom
let's go.
converted in Spain. So you want to talk about like a Catholic bastion? So she's Italian. She grew up speaking Italian. And then at university was taking Spanish and did a exchange program where she went to live in Spain for a year and finish her degree there, including like language.
Mhm.
And the host family that she lived with was not Catholic, and so she converted to like Protestantism.
What?
Yeah, so like
Wait, wait,
not
wait,
independent fundamental Baptist, but like
wait.
Protestant.
Hold
Yeah, yeah,
on.
yeah.
Hold
Oh
on.
yeah,
So she grew up with her family being
yeah.
Catholic for
Italian Catholic.
20 years or
Yeah,
so, and
yeah.
then it took one semester in Spain with the
Well,
host
a
family.
year, but yeah,
1 year in
year.
Spain.
And
Wow.
I think a lot of it is that my mom's family was culturally Catholic,
Ah,
like
there
most
it
of
is.
that,
Okay.
right?
Ah.
Like culturally Catholic. My grandma went to mass,
Mhm.
and all that, but they were not hardcore Catholic.
Okay.
And when she lived with this family, they were a lot more like actively religious, I think was the thing. And there were some other things that had happened in my mom's life. I think that, I think the interesting thing about cults, right? And the family she lived with in Spain was not in a cult, but I think it was a half step because I think a lot of people get involved in it for one of two reasons. The first is the places like that seek out people who've had massive recent traumatic events and are in grief or are in pain or have had deep loss that they're trying to fill. And the other is that there are people who are desperately looking for a way to change the world for the better, and are looking for a framework for that, are looking for a community for that, are looking for something that they can do there. And I think that my mom was looking for something, and this was sort of like a half step. And again, like she grew up Catholic, but not strictly Catholic. Like she went to a Catholic school,
Mhm.
and she probably went to mass. Like my grandmother goes to mass every week, but the rest of the family probably went to mass like 3 times a year, on the high holidays and that sort of thing. So I think
Okay.
my mom was looking for something that was a little bit more involved, intellectually stimulated, what have you. So then she converted. She came back, and she met my dad, who was already Protestant, who was already like Baptist. They got married, and then they probably about, I don't know, 3-4 years later, like I said, right around the time they had me, joined this church that was another step further, and then that church radically, evolved over the next few years. So
Yeah,
mm,
story. That's the oldest time. The what you mentioned there about how these cults, this targets vulnerable people. This is something that we talk about all the time on here because the core members of our show, the ones that started it, were me and Kayla and Kai, and the three of us all went to the same church in Missouri, and back in the 90s and everything, early 2000s, and it was right outside of a military base. And Kayla brought up one episode that she started to notice that a lot of these churches were just sprung up right outside of military bases. And that's when my family first got involved in it. We were in Germany at the time, and we were in a military base, and my dad had he went to AA. Like the army made him go for a drinking problem and everything. And that's how he ended up getting involved in it. He met someone there who invited him to church, and then we started going ever since. And after she pointed that out, I started to like every military base I've been in has a healthy fundamentalist Baptist church right outside because it's got everything you need. It's got people who are in vulnerable states. You got people who are away from their families. You have families who are alone because their spouse is gone for a year or so at a time. And it's got everything. And then
young, impressionable.
Yep.
You've got kids.
Yep.
I mean, look at Pensacola. Pensacola operates like at the heart of all that military stuff in Florida, and that's a huge draw for them.
I don't know anything about that. What
So Pensacola Christian College
Mm-hmm.
is where they're at in Florida. There's tons of military bases and installations all around that church.
Oh, I didn't know that. We had a Pensacola guy on once. We didn't know about the. Oh, he was in the Air Force. Now I think about it. You mentioned it. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's building that community is really a strong need when you're in the military and you're living somewhere 3 years at a time. You don't know anybody. church is perfect for that. In fact, I haven't gone to church in years. I can't remember the last time that I was a member of a church. But one thing I've always said is that church really nailed the community thing. It's hard to find
Absolutely.
a better substitute than church for building a community. I've yet to see one. I mean, there's some great ones out there, but it's hard to get people to coalesce around something like a church can do. And if anyone has any better ideas, let me know, because I've been looking for one. This is fantastic, but we'll see. And all right, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but when you said Maranatha seemed like a liberal and progressive breath of fresh air, I felt the exact same way. I felt the exact same way. And no one believed me. When I was at Maranatha, I remember telling people that, first off, everyone loved high school. I hated high school. I hated every second of it. I couldn't wait to leave. And a lot of people were reminiscing about high school and how much they would love to go back. I was like, man, I couldn't wait to get out of there. And then so many people would be complaining about the rules in Maranatha. I was like, yeah, there's a lot of rules here, but they're not that bad. I had never had so much freedom in my life. So I'm always glad when I meet someone else who had a similar experience.
Oh man,
because
that's what made it so easy. Honestly, I mean, I never came close to getting enough demerits to get kicked out. Partly because one of the great things about fundamentalism is it teaches you how to be sneaky, but partly because a lot of those rules were so much more lax than stuff that I'd grown up with.
So I would like to ask you, so I think the next question I had was okay, yeah, it actually does work perfectly with the next question I had. So before I get into those, at these institutions, like, no matter which one you're talking about, Bob Jones, Pensacola, Liberty, West Coast, or whichever one, these Christian schools, they're all going to have a rather strict set of rules that everyone has to follow that are very bizarre to anyone who's not familiar with the community. Like, they're really going to make you scratch your head. But when I got there, I didn't think the rules were all that crazy. However, there were ones that I would rather break. I was like, no, I'd rather not do that. And what you said is so true about how growing up in this environment teaches you how to be sneaky. You become a fucking ninja and find out how to break the rules. And there was this, I talk about this all the time. I can't remember which year it was, but it was my junior or sophomore year. And there was this special meeting called for all the guys. It was after dorm lock. It was like at 10:30. And do you remember this? Do you remember? Okay, so
there were a couple during my tenure. I don't know if I was, because you were. I think you were a senior when I was a freshman.
Oh yeah, so yeah, you may not. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was like 10:30. It was after dorm lock. Yes, there was a dorm lock.
I also
folks.
worked nights. I worked the night shift. So a lot of times when they would call those special meetings, we would literally be having to like clean around them or after them.
Yeah. And we all met in the gym, all the guys in the gym. And there was a bunch of people who got kicked out for watching porn on the school's intranet. And like, why they would watch on the school's intranet is kind of
how they managed to get past it is even
yeah, resourceful but not bright. It turns
also,
out.
I do kind of wonder what they called porn.
Oh, good question. Very good question.
You can get kicked out for looking at the cover of
a swimsuit
US
issue or something like that.
Whatever.
Yeah, US Weekly. Yes,
but still.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although I knew one guy who was kicked out for it. It was like a guy I knew who was kicked out for it. He was watching pornography from like Europe or something. Like like the
so the real thing.
It'll really exactly, yeah. So the or he made us watching a regular TV show in Europe, but they don't give a shit.
Also true. Also true.
So, but like I guess like the blocker or whatever didn't catch it since it was from out of the country or whatever. But anyway, there was they said, well, listen, we've already kicked out X number of people for this issue, and by the end of the week, we are going to kick out 3 more. And everyone was like, everyone had a heart attack and was looking around the room. People are saying their goodbyes to each other. It was just very funny. But then
putting a number on it, how nefarious!
I know, right?
This is what the Nazi mustache twirling Uber henchman says at a big, meeting in a film.
Exactly.
It's great. What about
exactly? They love that shit, by the way. The one thing that I've noticed that they got off on the fact that like kids were terrified of them. They loved that shit.
Gotta get entertainment somewhere.
Yeah, I know, right? It's true. And the thing is, though, that I remember there was some guy who got kicked out because you know how they would go through your dorms and check to see if you'd cleaned your room, and I guess he had left a drawer open or something, and they found like a pornographic DVD in his drawer. He had left it open, he didn't close it, and so he got kicked out. And this guy was not one of the bad kids, you know, the kids that you know are doing. Like he was one of the squeaky clean ones. But the issue is when you're one of the squeaky clean ones, you're bad at sneaking around. You're horrible at it. And so the people that ended up getting kicked out were like the model students a lot of times. And so like the ones that Maranatha was ashamed of graduated, had no problem getting all the way through. So that was pretty interesting. But so with your time there, let's go back to when you first got there. So it was like more relaxed to you, but even then, did you see like, okay, this rule is kind of ridiculous, kind of stupid. I can't believe they're still holding on to this.
Yeah, I think like weird things about what types of. Hang on, I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
The weird stuff about like what sports you could play or what sports you could not watch, or like when I grew up, for example, like we weren't supposed to watch sports. Because of the most like baseball or gridiron is fine, but like you can't watch figure skating, you can't watch Olympics, you can't watch like, which I did, but I was obsessed with the Olympics a lot because the costumes are all so
too form-fitting
and they're touching each other and they might be playing bad music during the figure skating routines and like you weren't supposed to watch any of that, right? But there was this weird thing like where it was like, well, okay, you can wear pants, but only to go bowling.
Yep, I remember that one.
Why? And like, okay, well then can I wear pants to go horseback riding? Well, no, you can't do that. But I can go. Like, why can you go bowling, but you can't like go golfing? Like, what sort of weird ass? And I actually do not remember the specifics, but there were definitely certain sports that you could not do, even though they did not seem to be any more like involve touching or involve anything that was more revealing than things that you were allowed to do. That was so weird.
I don't remember that one. That so certain sports were off limits or for girls.
Like certain activity. Well, I'm sure it was also probably gendered. I'm sure there were, because there were so many more things in terms of like what you could wear and what you could whatever. The gendered thing is wild. Like even with my brother, we reconnected a lot more recently and talking. Like there were certain things that he was just completely unaware of because he was 5 years younger than me and a dude, and it just didn't affect him. And it was never brought up to him.
Yeah, I remember reading the rule book, just going through, and I saw there was a section there for the men's dress code. And the men's dress code, it was broken down different sections. In fact, so when you got here, this rule was gone. But one particularly shitty part of the men's dress code is that, you had to wear, for class, you had to wear a shirt and tie. I think that was just for classes, you had to wear that. But you also had to wear a coat to dinner. Like you couldn't just show like you couldn't show up in casual clothes to dinner. You didn't have to wear a jacket to class, but you had to wear a jacket like a sports jacket or a suit jacket to eat dinner. And I was like, that's straight. That was gone.
But not to class.
Not to class. No, to class you did not.
That makes no sense.
It makes no sense at all.
Wear it to class, but like dinner, especially the cafeteria, like
it was,
the cafeteria is not set up for you to be able to stay, pristine.
And so I figure it must have been a holdover from some like formal gathering they had every evening. A good day to you, sir. And they sat down. That's the only thing, because we had it was a cafeteria. You stood in line. You had your tray. You sat in the solarium. And so that rule I thought was really dumb, but it was gone after my freshman year. Didn't have it anymore. But after that, the men's rules were mainly like classroom attire. And then you couldn't have inappropriate shirts. You couldn't have legalize it written on your shirt or anything. You couldn't have brands and stuff. Yeah, Abercrombie and Fitch was big back then. We couldn't wear that. That was a big deal.
They have sexy advertising. I know. You cannot wear their products.
And then a lot was spent on your hair. Like you couldn't have long sideburns, and your hair couldn't go past your middle of your forehead or something, and just stuff like that. But then I saw the women's section. it was like 5 times longer. It was just, I couldn't believe the detail, the fucking minutia they went into this.
Talk about brands, right? And like one of the things about brands is like, well, you couldn't have something where like the brand was just like on your chest. You like if you have a Nike logo that's here, that's fine. If you have a Nike logo that's like big and in the middle, not fine, because it's like drawing attention to yourself. You know, not that good luck finding like a Nike shirt that they'd let you wear full stop, but yeah, that sort of stuff.
I remember, I wish I could give credit to whoever this was. I can see her doing it, but I can't remember her name. But she was making a joke about this very thing, that, you know, the women weren't allowed to wear like Nike across the chest or whatever. And the guys didn't have a rule like that. And she says, well, the reason they don't have that rule is because, you know, they don't want to draw attention to the breast. Like a guy would need to have like Nike written vertically down his junk for it to be an equivalent rule. I thought that was a pretty funny joke that she made right there. But yeah, it was what I remember about that. An example of this from what you're talking about is there was a section in there on hosiery. And it said that I think you had to wear it to class. I think that was, or at least when I remember that. But it couldn't have designs on it. And I remember I'll never forget. Yeah, you can't have fishnets. You can't have like anything on there. Lightning bolt, like nothing. Could possibly. Sorry, can you imagine where fishnets? Could you imagine how that would have gone over?
With the seam up the back. Yes.
Yeah. I remember the book said there can't be any designs on it, and it said, think about it. Do you want that much attention drawn to your legs? And I was like, what is going on? I just remember reading that. It's like, God, that's so fucking weird and so strange. But were you there when they changed the jeans rule? I'm pretty sure you weren't, so you must just graduated after that. Before that.
Think so.
So
you can wear pants to certain things, but not yeah, I don't remember wearing jeans. Yeah,
you wouldn't have been allowed to wear jeans. That was a big complaint. So the women could wear khakis or slacks. And
can they wear jeans now?
Huh?
Can they wear jeans now?
Yes. As of like 2006. So I remember it was
I was there, man.
Okay,
I didn't graduate till like 2010. 11?
Oh my God. Okay, so you would have been there, because it was right after I graduated, because I remember seeing the email, and because it was me and my roommates, and someone had forwarded us the email, and the email said that as of this school year, the women students are allowed to wear jeans. However,
it was trying to get them passed. That's why I'm getting. Because you had to get any pants that you wore had to be checked, had to be passed. Good luck getting that fucking shit passed, man. And I was a very small, athletic, sports type body person, and I could barely get shit passed. Yeah, that's right. They literally would make you stand in line.
Oh God, really? I didn't know that part.
Yeah, within the dorms, it was up to your dorm supervisor. Check your clothes and make sure that they pass.
Oh yeah. Like they did with music or something, but with stuff you wore every day. But I remember they had changed it to saying that women are permitted to wear jeans now, but the jeans cannot be blue. I remember looking at that, it's like, what? Why can't the jeans be blue? And of course, no one knew what that meant. And they asked, they sent questions. So eventually the dean sent out a message that said, the reason that women can wear black jeans or gray jeans or pink jeans or white jeans, whatever, but they can't wear blue is because when, the denim jeans first started being made in the 1800s. Yep, it was because that's it. I kid you not. That was their explanation. And I remember reading that. It's been 20 years. I will never forget that, because it was the dumbest thing I had ever read in my life. It said, yeah, this is a symbol of the masculinity of the mid 19th century, and we don't think it's permitted or it's proper for women to wear that color. I was like, there's no way that's still a rule now. There's no way that rule stood the test of time.
I must have psychically blocked this out, man, because parts of this are coming back to me. But that justification is the damn stupidest thing I've ever heard.
One of the dumber ones. Like it's beneath Maranatha of all places. Like you would expect a little bit more of them. Because one thing I did like about Maranatha, I remember that they weren't a KJV only school, which I was pleasantly surprised to see. I thought that they might be that way. I said, okay, all right. They're willing to admit that some things are absolutely nonsense. So that was good. That was good news. And they did have the same stuff that all these places had with like the chaperones and the no touching stuff like that. It's just so before you went there, like with your church at home, did you run across any red flags back then that made you start rethinking the efficacy or the truthfulness of all this?
Yeah, I definitely. So I went through. I guess you'd say I went through phases, but I think part of the interesting thing was, again, because it felt, I'd go through a phase and then I'd go to a place that was slightly more liberal, and then it's almost like you reset your threshold. It's moving the Overton window for fundamentalism. It resets your threshold a little bit, and then you try to come to terms with it, and then you go through, and you're a teenager. First of all, you're an idiot, and you go through phases of rebellion, full stop, whether something is worth rebelling against or not, and then you sort of come through things. So I'd gone through a lot of those sort of like, well, this is stupid. This is and then you go to somewhere where things are allowed, and you are still trying to figure out everything. You're still trying to figure out the world. You didn't know, I hadn't known any different my whole life. So I had, but I think that when I look back and try to piece together, I see it was definitely a bit of a roller coaster, in terms of there was not one big hit you in the face sort of moment. It was a culmination of, dozens over the years.
Wow.
And I was always argumentative, always argumentative. And I will say this, that with one major exception, that the professors at Maranatha actually really enjoyed and engendered that. Like I had a teacher who would literally pick on me in class because he knew I would argue with him, because he would throw out a hypothetical, nobody would argue it, and he'd be like, Mel, like take that side of it and argue that with me. Now, I argued a bunch of stupid shit. Sometimes I argue shit for the hell of it. I almost got kicked out because of a paper that I wrote. Well, I didn't almost got kicked out. I almost lost the grade, I guess I would say, which would have made me take the class over, because I took a really, really oppositional opinion on literature, on a literature piece in a literature class. But most of my teachers actually really enjoyed the argument side of it. Like I would all the time.
Do you remember which teacher that was that would always pick on you to argue?
Licht.
Oh, I liked Licht. I liked him a lot. I liked him a lot. Side note on him, I talked about him the other day because you know how we're all taught the American mythology about how we're, literally a nation born out of God's will and everything, from sea to shining sea, manifest destiny. And it wasn't until Mr. Licht, he was the first time that I was exposed to the Native American viewpoint of Western American expansion. And he had us watch this video series called How the West Was Lost, which I'm already a sucker for a great turn of phrase. I was like, okay, that sounds cool, I'm in. And so it was the first time I had ever seen something like that. So like I did appreciate, seeing stuff from that light. And what you said about the arguing thing too, theologically, did that happen a lot? Because I gotta say, I had this happen. This is what really got me going ahead a little bit with the bullshit theology and everything, is that a lot of the clergymen or the professors that were there at the theologians at Maranatha, they were very familiar with these questions, and they would talk about them with us. And I talk about them at I remember talking to Dr. Saxon one time about the whole do people who never heard the gospel go to hell thing. And it didn't make sense. It didn't make any sense at all. And so I was asking him about this, and he said the same thing that everyone said. They pointed to the book of Romans, where it says that the look at the trees argument, that these people can see that there's a creator, so they have no excuse. And I was like, all right, fine. They think there's a God. They all do. I mean, that's pretty much everybody that's existed. They have some sort of deity they worship. There's no way they could possibly know that a triune deity spoke reality into existence and sent one of his 3 personas to die in Bronze Age Palestine. They could never figure that out by themselves. Why are they still going to hell? And he's like, yeah, it's just one of those things. I was like, okay, so this is nonsense. There's no good answer for it. That's what bugs me. That's what really bugs me about that. Is that what you experienced?
So I think, first of all, what did you major in?
Oh, it's history.
Okay. So I think both being not presenting as a dude and also that I took not as many of the theology classes, right? I think they're in it's the one weird way. I did get a little bit more leeway. I argued with Saxon all the time. He loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Even by the time I went to Maranatha, I sort of embraced the like C.S. Lewis universalism idea, right? And I remember having that conversation with Saxon. And in the end, it really, what did bug me is it felt like he would espouse that personally, but he refused to put that label on it because that label is not like the fundamental theology.
It's blasphemy.
Right? Yeah, but like in the end, like he would be like, well, I see what you're saying is kind of the same. And I'm like, well, it's not the same.
Yeah.
Universalism is not what is preached here. And it was so strange because it felt like there were certain teachers there where I feel like if you weren't here, if you weren't trapped, then you might actually be a decent person and or have decent theology because some of them were one or the other already. But it's like you're being forced into this position because of who you are. And eventually, even if you don't deep down believe it, being forced to say that over and over and over and over and over again, it's true. I mean, it's brainwashing. And I think that had Saxon not, I don't want to speak for him. I think had he not been in that community, that he probably would have been a universalist, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
But I think you end up putting yourself in all of these weird pretzels, mostly to keep the community. In the case of Maranatha, it's also your job, your
livelihood's on the line.
Family. Like if you get excommunicated, especially if you're a kid, you might not see your family. Like that sort of threat. But eventually, you just end up believing it.
I wondered that too. About Saxon was one of the guys that really got, because like I still respected Saxon, but just like, man, like I there's no way he understands this worse than I do. That's all I could think of the entire time. Like he definitely knows where I'm coming from here. And he didn't seem disingenuous, because you're right, he was very tepid on it. Like it wasn't like a fire and brimstone. No, this is the way. It was like, what are you gonna do? Like, really?
He thought the same thing about women being pastors.
Oh, did he?
I think he would have been. I wrote a paper for one of his classes where I argued that women should be allowed to be pastors, and he first of all, he gave it an A, even though it probably wasn't that good. But he, I think
your moxie.
I think he 100% agreed with it, but couldn't say that he agreed with it.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those where I was like, women should be able to be president as well as pastor, and here are biblical reasons for that. Like here's the it was mostly Old Testament based, which is also like now that's
funny. That's funny. That's funny.
Because if you look at Paul, you can argue, well, he's arguing fit in with the culture to do a better job. He's not arguing women are fundamentally incapable. He's arguing if we allow women to do this. What's weird is that Paul is more racist than most people think and less sexist than most people think. That's what fascinates me about Paul. But he's actually arguing, for the most part, if you do this, it is going to prohibit the spread of the word because of the context in which you are doing it. So don't do it. And like that's the strongest argument against women being pastors in the Bible. And then if you go and look at Esther, and if you look at Ruth, really in particular, if you look at Deborah, like if you look at like Deborah, I think was the crux of the paper. And Saxon was like, yep, nope, 100%, you're correct. Yeah, go for it. But tepid.
hard. I found Deborah to be the best example. Like, very hard to argue women shouldn't be leader when she's a literal judge in the book of Judges, and Priscilla was an apostle. And yeah, I don't know. It's like some of this stuff doesn't like. Then I, found out about the biblical canon. And it's like, oh yeah, this is just a hodgepodge. That makes a lot more sense why they're picking certain things to be more important than others. Got to get Saxon on the show.
Ananias and Sapphira are a really fascinating one because they did a bad thing, but they were co-leaders in the church, so far as you can tell, before that happened. Like, they were a couple that were co-leaders and equals within the church. I have no idea where a lot of these people are at now, but I think I know Mr. Midcalf, who was everyone's favorite literature teacher, had left, like, I think the same time I did. And other than that, I don't really know. I keep up with a couple people who left, like, that I was peers with, but I don't really know what's happened to anyone other than Mr. Midcalf, really. Or I see Mr. Z around every once in a while.
Really? Oh, yeah. No idea where he's.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out something about, because you guys are never going to believe this, but I too enjoyed arguing a lot when I was around. You guys are never going to.
It's a wonder that we became friends.
I know, shocking. So that's what I was going to point out. That you told me, I think, that one of your first memories of me was a time we were at the I can't remember the name of the house, like the house we go to after church, and I was arguing. You remember?
I do remember this. It was the alcohol. It was
alcohol. Yep.
Yes,
and so
I do.
Yeah, and so I didn't know you at the time, and
I was just some poor little freshie in the corner.
And so you told me, you was like, TJ, I remember this one time, and I still remember doing it, where it was like,
I don't remember their name, but I can literally see it in my head now. People on this
Lashies, that was their name. Yeah, that was their name, and I remember the conversation came up about, hey, do you think it's okay to drink alcohol? And I don't know, it was pretty straightforward to me that the Bible says it's okay to drink alcohol. Like, many, many times. Like, it's not even up for debate. Apparently it was, because it was like me against like 7 other people. I couldn't believe it. I was floored. I was like, no, this is just very obvious right here. You guys are delusional if you think this is literally grape juice every single time it says wine. That's insane. So yeah, it's just funny that, we find each other. It's like this place also gets you sneaky, but also turns you into like a professional debater. Like, you kind of have to be one to survive in this world.
Oh yeah, I mean, I still enjoy that. Give me a side of the argument, whether I believe it or not. I'll find a way to. Which does turn you into one of those guys, like you.
I know.
It does.
Well, the fortunate part about that is that there's so many good things to argue that you don't got to take a bad faith position on a lot of stuff, because I don't like devil's advocate guys, because a lot of times, I've noticed devil's advocate folks are just assholes and don't want to admit they're assholes. They're like, oh no, I don't really believe women shouldn't vote. I'm just saying, before the 19th Amendment, I don't give any credit to those guys at all. But
oh yeah, not a single person I grew up with thought women should vote.
Oh, okay. All right. So glad you said. Well, I'm not glad you said this, but this is something I brought up from time to time, because once again, if you didn't grow up in this environment, you don't know. But one thing that I've noticed is that people who didn't grow up super fundamentalists, religious, whatever, they don't think that the religious fundamentalists actually believe this stuff. They think, oh, they're just using it to get power. There's a unit for like, no, some of them are, but it's true. They believe it. Like, it is as real to them as the ground they're standing on. And I bring this up about women voting. I said, you would be amazed how many women in this movement will come right out.
Because it's not just men who say it.
It's not just the men.
The women truly believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you would mention how in that paper you wrote that you thought women should be president. Were you talking about president of the country? Okay, or president of the school?
Oh yeah. I was talking about positions of public leadership specifically.
Okay.
Like I did leadership in the church and leadership in public. I didn't touch the home. I didn't touch the school. I didn't touch that. But I mean, it limited scope. But
yeah. Because when you said that, I remembered that our student body leadership, there was a student body president a men's student body vice president and a women's student body vice president, but only a man could be student body president. And I as a freshman, I said, that is absurd. I remember like my freshman year, I was like, that is ridiculous. This isn't a church. This isn't there's no biblical rule anywhere.
But hey, at least we could vote for him.
You could vote for him, at least. Yeah, be happy, women, and take that. But no, I do mention that a lot, that I'm not going to say it's a majority. I'm not going to say it's a majority of them, but it is a healthy minority, like that will come right out and say, yeah, I don't think women should vote. I think that, the man's the head of the household and they should just fall in line. They'll say it to your face.
Well, this is what I mean by like where I grew up. Absolutely. I would say if any of them believed women should vote, they did not say it out loud. 100% of the group that I grew up in was like, women should not vote. And then when I moved to, like, when I was a teenager, and then when I went to Maranatha, it was like, well, women could, like, some of them, I would say a lot of them would say, yeah, women can vote, or I vote, or whatever. So like, that's what I mean by like, oh, this is a big shift. This is liberal. This is progressive,
Wow. Yeah. I wonder why that is. I wonder, because you would think that a Midwestern religious fundamentalist group would be more extreme than a West Coast one, but apparently there's some asymmetry there. Like the further away,
Westboro's based it, like, and that's the closest. Yep. That's the closest analogy, really. And if you, it's a small group, but it's so insular, and you get like that mindset. The environment is too liberal. Like there's an inverse relationship between how liberal the environment is and how depraved the evangelical fundamentalists are. It just kind of they have to counterbalance each other. So we've kind of danced around like the issues and stuff we ran into. When did you make your break from the fundamentalist movement? Like when would you say that you realized to yourself that I'm no longer a part of this group at all? Did it happen in college and you were still forced to kind of go, or did it happen afterward? Yeah. I would say it happened probably, I would say by my third year, I was like, I need to get out of here. But it's hard to experience anything else when you're that deep in it. And then you have to finish your education because like to try to transfer all those credits, you lose so many years, so much money, all that sort of thing. And you have no, I'd say basically the moment I graduated. Was when I made my first break. Now, it still took quite a while. There's a lot of deprogramming that you have to do. It's not just like, you're like, well, I'm done now. But even then, it's almost like coming out a little bit where you have to, you tell people slowly, or you just kind of edge away and move to another city and hope they don't notice a little bit, But yeah, I'd say university, 100%. By the time I graduated, I was well out of there mentally already.
Do you remember what it was that did it? Because for us, like for example, for me, like it's never one thing. It's like a spider web, that just is compounds. But I do remember what finished it for me, where I couldn't call myself a Christian anymore, and it was, I believe, my sophomore year. And do you remember we used to have Baptist Heritage Week? We would have that every single year, and they would have this revival on the chapel, and people would come in. And I was really excited for Baptist Heritage Week because I enjoyed arguing with other denominations on why Baptists were correct. We all thought we were right. So I was like, okay, I'm in a Baptist school. I got all these teachers and professors, and I got these people. We're going to spend 5 days, 2 sermons a day, focusing on why Baptists have it right, or at least the most right. Like why we're the ones that have most right.
You want to talk brainwashing, man.
And at the end of the week, their answer was, Baptists are correct because we do what the Bible says. And I remember like, they would all say that. Everybody would give you that answer. You think that any other denomination would say, nah, we don't give a shit what the Bible says? Like, no, they're all going to say the same thing. So I started doing my own study into the formation of specifically the New Testament canon, so I could prove the 27 books of the New Testament were the Word of God. And what I found was not comforting at all. And I said, oh, okay, these books were, written, most of them shortly after the life of Christ, but there were dozens, if not hundreds, of these books out there, and that these 27 were picked at the Council of Hippo in like 305, and like 300 years. I just like, so people who had no more apostolic authority than you or me
And the
decided.
KJV originally had more books than it does now. They took some of them out 100 somewhat years later. Like, come on, we're not even KJV only people are not using the actual KJV as it was codified.
That was something too, that there's no such thing as the Bible. It doesn't exist. There is no the Bible out there, because like the books that we use that like Protestant Baptists use, not the same books that Catholics use, not the same books that Eastern Orthodox Christians use, not the same books that Coptic Christians use. Like there are different Bibles all over the place. And then you start, going into like, well, Bibles that were updated and revised and stuff. And it's like, okay, there's no way.
Which is actually fine.
Mhm.
If you admit that that's what's happening.
Exactly.
Stuff's revised all the time. The DSMV is revised all the time as we find out new things through science. But it's the fact that they fucking absolutely refuse to acknowledge that it's even happened. It's insane.
Because that would take work. That would take work in saying, okay, well now, and then an explanation of like, well, there were political reasons why these were taken. I was like, okay, so, God's not controlling all of this after all. And then I said, okay, listen, I still believe in some sort of, prime mover, divine artificer that got all this going. I still believed in, I was like a pantheist or whatever, but I could no longer call myself a Christian. I still had to finish school there. I still had to finish school, of course, but I had to drop it all.
Yeah.
Was there like a moment like that for you at all, where it was like, okay, you kind of shrugged and like, this is it?
I think I probably had a moment. I think the moment with the institution is actually a lot clearer to me than I think the theology thing just happens over time. And I also think that there's something about being queer where at some point you realize that fundamentally I am this, and I know that I am this, and I am not these other horrible things that you say. These things are incompatible. Like, you can be a bad person or you can be some of the things you say, but that's not innate with my queerness. And I think when you come to terms with that, then everything breaks apart, right? But I think that with the institution, there was I distinctly remember, obviously, I'd been fighting and arguing my whole life with the institutional rules. And I worked for the communications office. I had done video stuff there. I'd gotten some videos censored. I did a video that it became a big news story on Fox News about how I'm pretty sure at the time Afghanistan had passed a law about women not being allowed to wear pants. And I did a completely straight-faced story about how that was like quoting the Fox News thing about how that was bad. That was very clearly about Maranatha.
That's great. That's great.
The exact same way.
That's great.
It was online for about 12 hours, and pastors around the country, because it was on YouTube. It was pastors called and got it yanked off of the internet, like that sort of thing. Like, but weirdly, that's not even it. The one thing that I desperately remember is I wrote, there was a chick who I played soccer with, who had been put up for some sort of business award thing, not from Maranatha, from like locally. She'd gotten like a grant, something like that. And Maranatha wanted to feature that, one of their students had gotten this thing, and I wrote it. And because I Naomi, who ran the communications office, assigned me to write it because she knew I knew Autumn. I wrote the thing. And the board came back after, by the way, asking this piece to be written. The board came back and was like, the language that was used about Autumn was too masculine or too strong, like, because it said, she was the, and they basically rewrote the whole thing. And it was like, you wanted this thing to be written, and then you stripped away everything that was about what made her win the grant. Like, and actually what made me the most mad wasn't even that. It was the fact that Naomi, who was a brilliant, smart, honestly smarter than all of these men who were trying to tell her how to do her job person, was like being forced into this position and had no other recourse. And I was basically like, fuck you guys. I am not going to let this happen to me.
Hmm.
You know, institutionally, like you are just absurd. Like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy levels of absurd. You know? So yeah.
That's
two very different answers, but I think it's like you say, it's a spider web. It's a combination of all these things being woven, you know, over time in your life, and eventually you just have to like throw yourself off the ledge.
that is wild that they scrapped the article because she wasn't presented demure enough for them
Yes,
to get
so
the
demure.
article. That is
Just
fucking
nuts.
Oh, so you mentioned we hadn't brought this up, but like the queer issue thing. When did like when did you come to terms with that?
After I left, and I think
After, that's what I
that
thought.
was a self-preservation. That was a
Okay.
self-preservation thing. It's like the moment I left, I'm like, oh yeah, I've known this for a long time. And yet, if you allow yourself to acknowledge it, then you're fucked. And if you openly acknowledge it, you're doubly fucked. I really genuinely, for me, it was very much like flipping a switch and then looking back and realizing like, oh, the light's been on the whole time. But it was a very sudden, well, yeah. So like I think it's something in your psyche that just goes. But what's really funny, I mean, not funny. Anyone who's done this sort of thing will get it. Like I had my aunt was gay, and had been her whole life, and my grandma was completely open and accepting of that. Again, as an Italian Catholic in the, you know, whatever. And so I think a lot of my being like, you have this wrong about gay people, even when I was little, even when I was like, you know, 10 years old, sort of came from that. And then I was always like, I think we're badly misreading this theology about gay people, and gay people are fine, and you should accept gay people and whatever. And then you leave and you go, oh, hey. Not that that's always the case, right? Because obviously,
yeah.
I mean, and I'm sure that it's like they also say racist things that don't necessarily impact me. You can go that's wrong. They also say, you know, ableist. They say all of these things.
You name it, they'll say it. You name it.
You name it, they say it. But I think that at some point there's this fundamental incompatibility with what you know deep down about yourself and what they're saying about this thing that you know about yourself, and you're like, that you have no fucking idea. That doesn't jive.
Yeah, that's true. I want to pop up. Do you remember Heather Leverett? She was a Maranatha student too. She says, "This is insane."
I recognize that name.
Yeah, she was a Maranatha student. She said,
"Wild."
Yeah, it's crazy times out there at Maranatha. Yeah. So okay. So yeah, because I remember we were talking to you. We were at Bar Louie. Yeah, I think it was right. It's like it was. I remember we were talking. And you asked if I suspected that you may have been queer. I was like, yeah. I said, I said, yeah. I kind of expected this the whole time, but what am I going to say? But when did so you talk about how it's kind of like coming out, which I don't have any direct pair. You've done both, but like coming out and telling people that I no longer was a believer. I hid that for the better part of a decade, for about 7 years. I didn't tell. Well, I told one person. That was the girl I was dating, and we broke up. But I didn't tell anybody else. And the weight just was terrible on me all that time. And I finally told everyone. And after I told everyone, I became a massive prick. Holy shit. Like the fact that anyone is still...
You have to swing really hard. I did the same thing, man. Yeah. I swung so hard where I was basically like, if anyone believes in any aspect of religion, they're a fucking moron. Okay. Yeah. Terrible. But I think when you're so hardcore one way, I think most people swing so far the other way before they can find that happy medium that you just end up being a dick on both sides.
So
terrible.
So listen. I never found the happy medium. I still have not found that, because one thing I always say is I'm no longer a conservative, but I still think like one. I still think in very black and white terms.
Absolute.
And I have to recognize that my first thought, and then work through it, which is which I use to my advantage with communicating with conservatives a lot of ways, because I know where they're coming from, because it's just easier to do that. Like, life's a lot easier when you can split everything into two categories, you know.
So much easier.
Oh God, yeah, it takes a lot off your plate. But so and also I don't blame us too much for being like that, because one, we were right. Everything we said was true, and that's the most important thing. And second, I just felt so betrayed. Like, because I knew I wasn't the only person who had these thoughts. And I knew that I wasn't the only one who had these conclusions. And a lot of these folks were ignoring it. And they found that, and they're just pretending that's not the case. And they're lying to us. And I didn't appreciate that. So, I was feeling kind of hurt, but I have grown a lot through that. I would never just dunk on people for no good reason because they go to church on Sundays anymore. I'm not going to do, not that often at least. But so what about coming out with being queer? Like, how long did that take you, or how long, or was it more difficult, or how would you describe it?
I think the first thing I sort of did was after graduation, I went to Atlanta and I worked for Pace Magazine for a little while. And nobody there, not only did nobody there give a fuck, I gotta shut up. So I don't know if I've told the story publicly before. There's a guy, I've told individuals, there's a guy named Kevin, bless his heart. He was my boss. And at one point, hilariously, there was an event that was happening or whatever. There was this artist who was flirting with me very hard. And I had no idea what to do. And I had to go into this, I had to literally go into a back closet to pull out some musical gear. And he followed me.
No.
And no, it was really sweet. It was really sweet.
He's just he's barking up the wrong tree here.
No. He followed me. He's like, "Hey, are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." He's like, he clearly knew that he knew my background. He'd known sort of, and he's like, "If you need to leave or whatever, you can do that. That's fine." He's like, "Or if you want to, leave with so and so, you could do that." And I'm like, oh, he's trying to tell me that I'm being hit on and I should go for it. It's obvious to everyone. I had sort of figured it out for myself, but I was I had no idea how to tell people. I had no idea. And he was just basically like, "Honey, we know. It's okay. Go for it." But he was trying to do it in a way that was like, "I don't know if you know this yet. And also, I'm your boss. And so maybe this is awkward." But that was really the moment where I was like, oh, everyone already kind of knows and doesn't give a shit. So I should just act as though. And then I just did. I mean, it was easy there because no one had known me before.
Right.
And it was a totally, and then I just started acting as though, and everyone was like, whatever. Nobody cared at all. Which was very cool. And then, of course, then I had to actually start the process with people which was a much harder, more difficult story. But that 6 months that I was there, where I was living in a city where nobody knew me, and I was engaging in music and art and culture and, sex, drugs, rock and roll, really, honestly, was, pretty great.
Great. I've heard nothing but rave reviews. I gotta tell you.
No money. I was broke. I left the fundamentalism. I was living in a living room, but I was actually experiencing life for the first time. And it was wild.
There's something about being really young and really broke that's fun. It's just it shouldn't be fun. It should be. It is stressful. It's not like there's no stress involved, but if
at some point you're like, well, I can't get worse, so whatever.
Yeah, it's what? It's freeing in a lot of ways. It's so there's a weird reverse of this. So I remember I bought a house a couple years ago, and the house was $500,000, and I got, the mortgage for it. And so now I'm $500,000 in debt. And when I realized that, I was like, that's kind of freeing now. So like, if I want to take out a personal loan for $5,000, what does it matter? I'm $500,000 in debt. It doesn't matter at all. So like, there's a weird way that like being that saddled with debt kind of releases you. And I think you kind of feel that when you're, young, and at the reverse, you have no money and no assets at all, but you also have very few responsibilities. Now, if you're 40 and you have no money, no responsibility, that's not fun at all. Yeah, that's a lot worse. But
welcome to working in the arts.
but like when you're really young, it's like, hey, this is just an adventure and everything. So I don't know. It's kind of wild. But so when it did come time to like get this news to your family and friends and everything, which one do they have a harder time accepting, like the departure from the religion? Because I'm curious, because I imagine they found out at the same time. Or both at the same time.
No, I think weirdly being queer was a lot easier to just not talk about, whereas being clearly, because like, what are the outward markings, especially if I didn't have a girlfriend or wasn't living in sin with a boy or whatever.
No trigger point for them.
But I'm clearly wearing jeans that are blue. I started getting tattoos. I'm not, I'm saying swears, like all this other stuff becomes really obvious, right? And so some of it was just like, well, I'm just not going to talk about it. I'm not going to talk about either of them, but one of them is a lot more apparent than the other. I will say that my family did not take either of them well. And I, their choice, am still estranged from some of them. And a couple of them in the last couple of years have come around. And I think, look, they have their own stories to tell. And that's, and it's still quite a journey. But I think a few of them have come further than I ever thought they'd come, and only in the last few years. But yeah, it didn't always go well. In terms of friends, I think at some point it did become, well, if this is what our friendship is based on, then I don't care if you don't want to be friends with me.
That's a good way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
It wasn't based right. But I have to say that I was kind of surprised pleasantly by a couple of people who were really supportive that I didn't expect. And that, I still, I think you know Dale.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Dale is the first person that I sort of ever publicly, I guess, came out, like, best mate, and his kids are my god kids. And what was really funny is I told Dale, and it was the first person. He was just, first of all, he was like, "Yep, I know." He was trying not to do the thing where you're like, "Of course," and it's like, I knew it's like, I know that you know, but I still have to say it, and I still am not sure how does this go. And then what was really funny is, like, the next day I kind of told his kid, and I'm just anonymizing things for the sake of the internet, and his kid just kind of looked at me, was like, it was 3 at the time, I think. I was like, yeah, so, and just could not give less of a flying fuck. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually the response that I want. It was,
yes, right.
It took me, but it was just kind of like, well, this doesn't change anything about our relationship. You're still who you are. Cool. I'm going to go about my life. And that's exactly the response that, you sort of want. And then, yeah. So definitely both sides of the spectrum I got,
Yeah, that's the sad thing about doing these interviews, is that when I get to this question, because generally it's not talking about, sexuality. It's just talking about, breaking from religion and faith and everything, or the cult, is that you never know how people are going to react. And a lot of people, like you mentioned, their family members break contact. All right, you're done. You're not going to have the same set of spiritual beliefs that I have, and we're sorry, we excommunicated. And then some folks are really cool, and it's just it's just really sad to see that people can just base their contact with you on that, which is like kind of the point of the cult movement.
It's absolutely the point. And there is one person in my life where, weirdly, and I 10 of 10 do not recommend, but where I think that it became the impetus for them leaving in a lot of ways, because they were like, well, I don't want to hate you for this, and I don't want to break contact with you for this because it seems insane, but I have to, right? And which is, it's hurtful hurtful, but when you've been raised in it, you understand why they feel that way. And understanding and explanation are not excusing. And it took them a little while, but eventually they also left. And I think that maybe this was a big straw that broke the camel's back, because they really even said, like, it doesn't, like, nothing else seems to have changed about you. In fact, if anything, you seem to be, more understanding and compassionate of this than you were before in general. And it's like, yeah, so why should I just have to not engage with you at all? That doesn't make sense. So
I did an interview with when you mentioned like your friend and how that broke it. A friend of mine I went to high school with, she was my best friend in high school's older sister. She's a year older than I was. And she came out as queer to her family and friends, years after graduating from high school. And she went to Utah and she worked alongside this family. She became close friends with them. Her family's from Missouri and she lived in Utah, and that family kind of like took her in, and like she was part of the family. She was there for all the holidays and everything like that. And then years later, she came out and she told them, and like this girl who was like a quasi sister to her said, I can't believe you would do something like this. Like, how could you do this to? And like, it was like she was the one who was chiefly offended here. That and
you hurt me.
Yes, yeah, and it ended, and she broke it off. She's like, all that didn't matter. Like, you're the same person, but since you've done this and slighted me somehow, I've got to. And that's just heartbreaking shit. I hate to see that. That's awful.
And they act as though you weren't queer when you were interacting with them before.
Oh, she said that's true. That's true. She said the same thing. I was always this way. You just didn't know. And so, like, that is some. Oh God. All right. So I always wrap these up with one thing that fascinates me more than all the other stuff, believe it or not, is where people end up spiritually afterward, because it is just a shotgun everywhere of, some people are still dedicated Christians. They go to church every week. Some people have abandoned religious belief altogether and everything in between. Some people are, pagans or Buddhists or Wiccan. I mean, it's everywhere. And so I love finding out where people ended up. How would you best describe your spiritual or religious views today after all this time?
I mean, I guess I'd say like broadly agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like we said, pendulum, where you come one way and not only are you like inherently anti every possible religion, but like a real asshole about it.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go through the phase, or you might visit other churches, or you might talk to other people. You might like dabble in other religions, or you might, sometimes you have to do the religion light thing where it's almost like a gateway drug, out or detoxing, if you will, depending on how you want to look at the metaphor. And I think I spent the first 5 years, besides being an asshole, but you're just trying to unlearn everything you've learned. You don't have time to really genuinely engage in a lot of ways with other things. And then you're basically starting from scratch. Like, you're starting from ground zero, trying to figure out, what you believe, what all is out there that what you were told about that they were actually correct about, and what you were told that was wildly misrepresentative of an entire group of people. I do make a joke that there are certain things that I've come to realize growing up were absolutely true, but not for the reasons that I like. So, for example, I grew up in California. My dad has always been like very, very anti-Pelosi and anti-whatever. And now I come around and I'm like, oh yeah, she's a terrible politician. Not for the reasons that you said she was. Like, we don't agree on the why, but we are correct about like,
her owning stocks and everything.
Yeah, like the weapons manufacturer, all of that, right? So trying to parse that out took another similar. So I would identify as agnostic, partly because it's like, I think it took me so long to unlearn certain things, and certain things I still have fundamentalist knee-jerk reactions to, which is wild.
It's hard not to.
It is. It's brainwashing. It's indoctrination, and it was the first, like, since I was born, 20 years of my life, you know. And then just
You
to
can.
acknowledge that I'm still.
I was like,
Sorry?
you can take a girl out of the cult, but you can't. I mean, it's one of those things. Yeah,
Kind of ingrained.
yeah. Sorry. Go
Uh,
ahead.
yeah, and so yeah, that's sort of where I end up. I'm like, I don't believe in any one religious thing. I'm not even a universalist, you know, although I would say that for a long time I was, even when I was still in the cult. But I'm still don't know enough really to be dogmatic about certain things, and so I'm I'm very happy not being as dogmatic as I used to be about anything. And
Yeah,
so I think that for a lot of reasons, that's why I would say agnostic.
yeah. I feel you. Like it's I am happy not to be there, but I would be lying if I said I didn't miss that feeling of having all the
That
answers.
certainty, man, is so
Oh, it's like
good.
a drug.
It's
It
so
feels so
good.
great. It felt so great. All right, so we'll close up here a little bit, but if you want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to, like I see you're always working these projects in the film industry. Everything it looks so fun and everything. Well, like what got you out to Australia? I know that's way too long to talk about in a button-up thing,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you know, I best you can do.
Yeah, look, I work in film and TV. I've done just about everything: reality TV, narrative TV, documentaries, you know, what have you. I've recently directed some cool projects, written a couple others that I'm, you know, if you have a few $1 million lying around and you want to invest in a feature film, hey, we'll put you
Hey.
as executive producer in the titles. But yeah, I work in film stuff. I do a lot of writing and directing. I've got a queer footy web series coming out pretty soon. I'm very happy of. So I've also gotten really into Australian rules football. And if you have not watched Australian rules football, you are not living. It is the best parts of soccer, rugby league, and gridiron football all put together. And I've always loved soccer. Big fan. But yeah,
Oh, that's
AFL.
right. You played. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, you played soccer
Yeah,
back then. Yeah, I
and
remember.
yeah, so it's very gay, and it's but it's gay sports and like lots of saturated neon lighting. So basically, three of my favorite things.
Oh yeah, you can't go wrong with stuff like that. That's
Yeah,
fantastic. That's fantastic. Ah, well, thanks so much, Melanie. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate you, and every chance I get to talk to you, I always enjoy. Melanie always comes around to let me know something that I think is weird, and then like a year later, like, oh no, Melanie was right about that. Melanie was absolutely correct. That's happened more
I
times
got
than I
my
can.
finger on the weird pulse.
Yeah, it's so happens more times than I can possibly count. But I really appreciate you, folks. We'll catch you next time. All right, we'll close out here. Thank you
Thanks.
so much.